What's up guys, welcome back to Drive Steady. In today's video we're reviewing one of the coolest Gullwing door cars that's typically forgotten, and that's the Bricklin SV1. If you're like most people, you're probably asking yourself, what the heck is a Bricklin? Bricklin was a car company during the mid to late 70s and was founded by a guy by the name of Malcolm Bricklin. Malcolm Bricklin was the epitome of a wheeler dealer, charismatic entrepreneur, having started 30 car companies in his lifetime. His first stint in the car industry was when he formed Subaru of America, where he was importing Subaru vehicles into the United States. From there, Malcolm decided he wanted to start his own car company. That's when he created the Bricklin Car Company. Because of all the safety regulations being put in place at the time, Malcolm's vision was to make safety look good when no one believed he could. His vision was to create a safe, fast, and good-looking sports car, and that's when he came up with Bricklin's first and only model, the SV1, designating Safety Vehicle 1. The SV1 car was produced between 1974 and 1976. The whole story behind the Bricklin is a fascinating one, as it went from nothing to building a super sexy, good-performing Gullwing door sports car to basically nothing again. In 1976, Bricklin filed for bankruptcy for many reasons, but mainly due to expensive manufacturing process and terrible build quality. So that's your history lesson. Now let's talk about this car. This is a 1974 Bricklin SV1. It's painted in this beautiful lava orange color. The owner decided to paint it in a Porsche color. So if you were curious, yes, this is the Porsche 911 color lava orange. And a couple of the cooler things about this car, number one, are obviously these fender arches. They look really nice, and the overall style of the Bricklin is it's laid out in a hammer style, much like the Corvette. It's got the long front hood with the short deck in the rear, and of course you've also got the hallmark design of this car, and that is the Gullwing doors. All right, so this car has many interesting cues, and of course, as I mentioned, the design hallmark of this car are the Gullwing doors, and I want to show you how these things basically operate. They're very interesting in the way they work, and the owner has modified them to work a little bit more efficiently than they did as when they came factory stock. So you've got this key here. This is what it looks like, and you stick it in this little hole right here. So this is in the lock position, so I'm putting the key in here this way. Come on, key. And then there you go. So now it's unlocked. I can take the key out, and there are these buttons here, the up and down buttons. You can see here, there's the up, there's the down. So now let's operate this door. Look at that. So let me tell you about how the owner modified this Gullwing door. Originally, the Bricklin was designed to work with a hydraulic spring for these door shocks right here. Come take a look here. So these were originally operated hydraulically, but what the owner has done, he's put in an air shock system to make this thing operate a lot more efficiently and a lot smoother. Now, one of the big issues the Bricklin had was with the hydraulic system was it would take 8 to 12 seconds for this door to raise. And obviously that's kind of inefficient and takes a long time, but you can see here, this door opens and closes very, very quickly. Takes all of what, 2 or 3 seconds. And now let's raise it back up. Isn't that super cool? All right, so now we're over on the passenger side of the Bricklin. I wanted to talk about these doors a little bit. These doors weigh about 86 or 90. They're basically 90-pound doors. And the interesting thing, I was talking to the owner, if this air system fails, the shock fails, this door will basically slam down. And it's such a surreal idea to think, like, as you're getting into the car, the door kind of fails and you're stuck. But one of the cooler things the owner has left over from when this car was new is this little emergency kind of thing. I don't know what, a piece of wood is basically what it is. And you can see here the engraved Bricklin SV1, and this is an original from when the car was new. And what the function this serves is as a emergency latch here, a safety. So basically you put this thing here, and if your door fails, it won't come crashing down. This piece of wood will hold on to the door for you. Let's talk about how you get in and out of this thing, because obviously it doesn't have the traditional doors. You've got the Gullwing doors, and one of the pieces about the Bricklin is this structural piece here is very sturdy. Obviously this car was built for safety, and it's very wide, so getting in and out can be a little difficult. So let me demonstrate how that basically works. There's multiple ways. Obviously you can do one of these things. Oh, and the seat is actually very, very low in this car. You sit pretty low down to the ground. So one of the things I like to do, you can either put your foot in first and get in this way. So that's how it looks. Obviously you can see I'm sitting pretty low to the ground here, and getting out is actually a little bit more difficult. Now, because I'm 5'10", so I can't take my foot out and put it on the ground and kind of get out like a normal car. My foot kind of floats, and I got to do kind of like one of these things. I can imagine for someone who's shorter, it's going to be pretty difficult to get in and out of this thing on a regular basis. All right, so now let's talk about the front end of this car a little bit. The first thing I want to talk about are these fender arches here, the wheel arches. It's got them in the front and it's got them in the rear, and it sets the car off very nicely. It makes it look very, very wide, and you can see that the flared fenders are a typical design language of many modern cars now. And cars like the BMW M3, M4's got them. A lot of the Mercedes have them. The Corvette Z06 has them as well. And they're obviously a performance hallmark. So this car back in 1974 had that design language, which goes to show you it's a very nicely designed car and looks really cool. Now, the overall profile of this car is more along the lines of a hammer style layout, and you can see that because it resembles a lot of the Corvette's layout. So it's got the short rear deck and the long hood in the front. So that's kind of what this layout is called in the Bricklin. And in addition to that, because this car is a safety car or safety first sports car, these bumpers here are very heavy. It's almost like they're concrete. This body is fiberglass, but these front bumpers feel like there's got like some concrete in them or something. So these front bumpers were engineered by Bricklin for the 1974 safety standards, and I believe that was up to 8 miles per hour of impact. And these things performed admirably during the safety regulation testing at the time. Okay, so now we're at the rear end of the Bricklin. A story about the taillights of this car. If they look familiar to you, it's because they're from a Pantera. The story behind that is the lead designer of the car, they were having a showing for a bunch of investors, and the lead designer didn't have the taillights on. They hadn't had them designed yet. So basically, at the time, he was driving a Pantera. He took the taillights off of a Pantera and put them on this car. So the Bricklin SV1 has the same taillights as a Pantera.
And the Maserati Ghibli.
And the Maserati Ghibli. All right. So next thing on the back side of this car is obviously this big bumper. So all those safety regulations that apply to the front also apply to the rear. This thing is like a concrete brick. Okay. Some of the other things on the back here or some of the issues on the back are the seals. This was one of the major complaints regarding quality of the Bricklin, and that is the sealing in the back here. The owner of this car washed it before he gave it to us, and there was a lot of leaks that were coming in onto the back side, the back hatch of the car. So that is an issue. I think the owner has somewhat taken care of it. It's not as bad as it was originally, but that's another thing. And lastly, remember that these doors operate using the air shocks instead of the hydraulics, and that is the air compressor where the air is stored is underneath this rear bumper here, and there's an area where you can check the pressure. Obviously, most people aren't familiar to this now, but this is where you fill your gas, and here is where you can measure your air temperature. I mean, the pressure that you've got in your air compressor, that's right there, and this is the locking mechanism for your trunk. Of course, this is a sports car. It was meant to compete with the Corvette. So let's talk about the engine. You can see the hood is the same, I guess, opening method as the Corvette. It's got the clamshell. It opens backwards. And this engine is a AMC sourced 360 engine, 360 cubic inches. It's a 5.9 liter engine, and it pumped out 220 horsepower and 315 pounds-feet of torque. The owner has left it mainly stock, but a piece of history: in 1974, the Bricklin came with this AMC 5.9 liter engine, but due to a shortage from AMC, the Bricklin decided that it would put a 351 Ford engine in the SV1. Because of that, the power dropped to 175 horsepower, and I don't know what the torque is, but it came in roughly about the same. The transmission in this car is a 3-speed automatic. If you wanted a manual, you could only get it in the 1974 model, as it was only available with the AMC engines. The Ford 351, available from 75 to 76, was available with a automatic only. Now, it's estimated that only 5% of Bricklins were built with a manual transmission. So the manual is going to command a premium if you're looking for a Bricklin SV1 in a manual transmission. All right, so now we're on the inside of the Bricklin. I want to show you how to operate the Gullwing doors when you're on the inside. So there's this locking mechanism, just like any other door. So you've got the lock and unlock. Obviously, if you leave it unlocked, these buttons here that operate the Gullwing doors will not function. But let's leave them unlocked, and now let's operate the Gullwing doors. So here's the up, down. So this is down. See ya. All right, so the door is closed now. Now I'm gonna lift it up using the opposite direction. And that's how you operate the Gullwing doors from the inside. Let's talk about the interior a little bit. You can see when I sit straight, my hair is touching the top of the car, and it's a funny feeling when you're driving. I'll also give you a glimpse of that during the driving segment of the review. So for a taller individual, if you're probably closer to 6 feet and you've got some hair, you are definitely touching the top of this roof. The layout of the interior is similar to the Corvette. Again, it is a pass-through. The back trunk here, there is a lot of room to put your stuff in. I could imagine, I don't know, maybe about like, and I'm not exaggerating here, you can probably fit 10 to 15 grocery bags back here. It's really that big. And just coming to the overall layout of the car, obviously this is from 1974. It's very simple, but the owner put in a lot of effort into making all the panels align. The quality of the leather is very nice. This upper dash trim in this brown leather suits the rest of kind of the sand beige interior. These pieces are obviously plastic. This piece is covered in this faux type of leather. It's got somewhat nice stitching, of course, of 1974 quality. And here is the storage compartment. It's not really much going on there. Of course, handbrake, your shifter for your automatic transmission. And this is really cool. It's got an analog clock, which obviously you can see is not operating properly. It's showing 7:58. It's much later than that at this point, but it's cool nonetheless. It resembles a lot of what people have by their bedside with the analog clocks, so that's really cool. And the last thing that is one of my personal favorite things about the interior of this car are the gauges operate in reverse. It resembles a lot of what Aston Martin does in its cars, and I think it looks extremely cool. I'll give you guys better footage of that during the driving segment, but overall it's very driver centric. The gauges are pointed towards the driver. The analog gauges are small but visible and operate very nicely, even for a car that's over 30 years old. And you've got all your switches down here, so it's pretty much a standard car, very analog, very different than a modern car now from today's day and age. But it's got AC, all the modern amenities that you would have in a car from the modern era. All right guys, that covers the engine, the exterior, the interior, the gullwing doors of the Bricklin SV1. Now let's go on to the driving segment. Let's take this brick out on the road and see how it does. So here we are setting off in the Bricklin SV1. Initial reactions just from the seating position and visibility standpoint. As I said, I'm 5'10", and I've kind of got this feeling that when I sit up straight, I can feel that my hair is touching the top of the hood, the top of the roof, and there isn't really much headroom. You definitely are going to have an issue sitting in this car if you're over 5'10", probably closer to 6 feet or above 6 feet. Forget it. I've basically got the seat all the way down and all the way back, and it's not that it's not comfortable. It's actually a pretty comfortable place to be, but this roof feeling on top of you is a little weird. Otherwise, the door sills, or not the door sills, but the doors themselves are very high. The best way I can describe it is it resembles a lot of what the new modern age Camaros are like, where you feels like you're sitting in a bunker. So yeah, the outward visibility is actually pretty good. Even though the hood is very long, you can still see parts of the lower part of the fender down to where the headlights are. From the side mirrors are kind of funky. They're small and they kind of project a little differently, or they're a little weird in the sense that they're not like a traditional modern headlight. And the view out back is actually pretty good, even though you've got the slanted hood and slanted trunk glass in the back, so it's not that bad. Out the side views, it's pretty good as long as you turn your head. The C-pillar does have a glass there that allows you to see basically all around the car. I wouldn't call it the fishbowl feeling like you get in a Porsche 911, but it's fairly close. So to describe it, I would say maybe Porsche 911 with a little bit of the new Camaro, and you've obviously got the long hood in front of you that gives you a little bit of the Corvette feel. Now, the driving feel. This being an automatic, it's a 3-speed automatic, and it's hooked up to the AMC 360 cubic inch engine, and it pumps out 210 horsepower, I believe it was, and 315 foot-pounds of torque, and that feels more than adequate in this car. Once you get into that top gear, it cruises along effortlessly. People would scoff at 300 plus horsepower today, but back in the 70s, that was actually a decent amount considering the oil crisis and all the safety regulations that people had to, or manufacturers had to be dealing with. So combining the 300 torque, it gives you a lot of pulling power down low once you're cruising. So passing people, this thing drops into the lower gear, and you've got plenty of down low torque to get going even while you're cruising. Now overall, the feel, it just feels like a sports car, even though this is a car from the 70s. I drove a Corvette, a 68 Corvette a while back, and this is a little bit more sophisticated than that. It's got power steering, power brakes. That car didn't, and this somewhat feels modern-ish. It's got some of the new technologies or mechanical technologies that cars have nowadays, so it feels like a normal car. You drive it, I'm almost inclined to say it feels like a comfortable daily driver, like a GT car. It's not a full-fledged sports car like the Corvette was, or at least when I compare it to the Corvette, it doesn't feel that way. Obviously, one of the things, this is an automatic, that was a manual, but this feels totally contained, something you could even drive, as ridiculous as it sounds, on a daily basis if you can get beyond some of the the crackles and the creaks. But this is a nicely put together car. Obviously that has a lot to do with the owner and the restoration process, but yeah, but this is a pretty solid car. Next, let's touch on the suspension. This is meant to be a sports car, but it is comfortable at the same time. I believe it was Road and Track or Car and Driver, when this car came out in the 70s, did a piece comparing this car to the 1974 Corvette, and that's the league that this car was compared to. But when you drive it today, it feels, I don't know if the wind is coming through, hopefully the audio is coming through properly, but it's a civilized car. It's not harsh on you. The seats are comfortable, the cushioning is good. The suspension, it's not direct. Obviously the steering is not direct. There's vagueness, there's a little bit of lag in the response. The steering wheel isn't completely center, but once you get beyond that, it gives you this feeling of driving these old cars from the 60s and the 70s, much like it did for me when I was driving that 68 Corvette. So that covers kind of the engine and the suspension side of it. The visibility we talked about. The last piece I want to touch on is the cool factor, or how do you feel when you drive this car? And me personally, I feel really, really cool. The fact that I've got Gullwing doors, the orange paint completely sets the car off properly, and you get a lot of looks when you're in this car, especially when you pull up and you come to a local gas station or whatnot, and you lift the Gullwing doors to get out. Most people are asking you what that is. A lot of people take out their phones and they start taking pictures. So there's definitely an experience, a cool side of this car, for sure. It's not to be overlooked. It's as cool as that 68 Corvette that I drove, and I feel cool driving it. It takes me back to an era that I never experienced. And of course, to add on to the driving experience, you've got this V8 engine under the hood that rumbles and shakes at the stoplight. It is smooth, don't get me wrong, it operates totally fine, but it gives you that old feel of these V8 engines from way back in the day. So it does give you that proper muscle car experience. Even though it's got the automatic transmission, you've got this big lumbering V8 under the hood that's taking you down the road basically effortlessly. So I'm grateful for being able to drive a car like this and to be able to experience this type of driving pleasure, or what do you want to call it, feeling. So with that, I wanted to close out this video with a final thought. You see, at one point the Bricklin SV1 cost $16,000 to make, but it sold for only about $5,000. So Bricklin was losing money on a lot of these cars, even though they were extremely popular. Today we live in a day and age when companies lose money and thrive. Companies like Facebook and Uber come to mind, with investors willing to throw cash out like nobody's business. Back then it was a different era. Potential was seen in a different light, and it meant that if you didn't make money, you were out. All said, Bricklin was able to build roughly 2,900 cars before closing its doors in 1976. Could Malcolm Bricklin possibly have turned the SV1 around? Maybe, but he never got the chance. The Bricklin SV1 never got the attention it deserved. The car with so much potential and hype ended up being nothing more than a flash in the pan. The SV1 is a car that tickles your imagination. It sparks an emotion, and some can argue that it's a work of art. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what I call a cool car. And the Bricklin SV1 is nothing short of cool. Thanks for watching. Until next time, drive steady.